The chrome-plated motorcycles gleamed under the afternoon sun as three burly bikers pulled into the small-town diner's parking lot. Their leather vests creaked as they dismounted, boots crunching on the gravel. Inside, the bell above the door chimed as they entered, drawing curious glances from the lunch crowd. Among the diners sat an elderly woman in her 70s, quietly enjoying her usual cup of coffee and slice of apple pie. Her weathered hands wrapped around the warm mug as she gazed out the window, lost in thought. A small gold star pin adorned her simple blue cardigan, a symbol few would recognize, but one that carried immense weight. The bikers settled into a booth near her, their loud voices carrying across the quiet diner. They were passing through town, part of a larger group that had split up along the highway. Their conversation grew increasingly rowdy as they ordered their meals, peppered with crude jokes and casual profanity. The elderly woman didn't pay them much attention until one of them knocked over his water glass, sending it shattering to the floor. When the young waitress rushed over to clean it up, the bikers began making inappropriate comments, causing her visible discomfort. "Boys," the elderly woman spoke up quietly, "that's no way to treat a lady." The largest of the three turned toward her, his beard failing to hide a mocking smile. "Mind your business, Grandma. Nobody asked for your opinion." "I raised my son to respect women," she continued, her voice steady but firm. "He'd be mighty disappointed to see grown men acting this way." The second biker snorted. "Yeah? And where's this perfect son of yours? Still living in Mommy's basement?" A sad smile crossed her face as she touched the gold star pin. "No," she replied softly. "He's serving our country. Has been for the past 15 years. The third biker, who'd been relatively quiet until now, leaned back and laughed. "Oh, one of those military types? Probably some desk jockey pushing papers around." "Actually," she said, taking another sip of her coffee, "he's a Navy SEAL." The bikers exchanged glances before the first one waved his hand dismissively. "Listen, lady, you expect us to believe your boy's some kind of elite warrior? Why don't you stick to your knitting and leave us alone?" What the bikers didn't notice was the tall, muscular man who had just entered the diner. His sharp eyes took in the scene as he stood silently by the door. The elderly woman saw him, though, and the slight smile that crossed her face was different now, knowing, almost amused. The man moved with silent precision, years of training evident in every step. He wore civilian clothes, jeans and a plain black t-shirt, but there was no hiding the military bearing in his posture. As he approached the booth, the elderly woman's smile grew wider. The first biker was still talking, his voice getting louder. "Maybe if your son was here, he could teach us some manners. But he's not, is he? So why don't you?" "Actually," the newcomer's quiet voice cut through the air like a knife, "he is." The three bikers turned, finally noticing the imposing figure standing beside their table. The man's face remained neutral, but his eyes held an intensity that made the loudest biker swallow his next words. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, never taking his eyes off the bikers. "These gentlemen giving you trouble?" The elderly woman's eyes sparkled as she looked at her son. "Nothing I can't handle, dear. Though they seem to have some interesting opinions about Navy SEALs." The atmosphere in the diner had shifted dramatically. Other patrons watched in silence, many having witnessed the earlier harassment. The young waitress stood near the counter, a small smile playing at her lips as she watched the scene unfold. The Navy SEAL pulled up a chair, positioning it at the end of the biker's booth. His movements were casual, but there was nothing relaxed about the way he looked at each man in turn. "You know," he said conversationally, "my mother taught me a lot about respect. Seems like you gentlemen could use a similar lesson." The first biker, despite his obvious discomfort, tried to maintain his bravado. "Look, man, we were just having some fun. No harm meant." "No harm?" The SEAL's voice remained eerily calm. "You disrespected my mother, harassed a young woman just trying to do her job, and attempted to intimidate someone you thought couldn't stand up for themselves. Where I come from, that's the definition of harm. The second biker started to stand, but one look from the SEAL made him slowly sink back into his seat. The third biker, showing more wisdom than his companions, began reaching for his wallet. "Listen, we'll pay for our drinks and go. No need for any trouble." "Trouble?" The SEAL smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I haven't even begun to explain what trouble looks like. But since you mentioned it, here's what's going to happen." The SEAL leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. His voice remained conversational, but there was steel beneath the surface. "First, you're going to apologize to the waitress. Then to my mother. And you're going to mean it." The three bikers glanced at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. The largest one cleared his throat, his earlier bravado diminishing under the SEAL's unwavering gaze. "Look, we didn't know." "That's the problem, isn't it?" the SEAL interrupted softly. "You never know who people are. That gold star pin my mother's wearing? It means she's lost a child in service to this country. My younger brother, who gave his life in Afghanistan 3 years ago." A heavy silence fell over the diner. The elderly woman touched her pin gently, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The bikers' faces drained of color as the weight of their actions sank in. "That waitress you were harassing," the SEAL continued, gesturing toward the young woman. "She's working double shifts to put herself through nursing school. She wants to work in the VA hospital, helping veterans like my brother's teammates who came home carrying wounds you can't see." The smallest biker hung his head, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The middle one fidgeted with his bandana, clearly uncomfortable. The largest one sat perfectly still, his face a mask of shame. "I've spent 15 years of my life defending people's right to live freely, to speak their minds, to ride their motorcycles across this beautiful country," the SEAL said, his voice taking on a teaching tone rather than a threatening one. "But with freedom comes responsibility. The responsibility to treat others with dignity, to show respect to those who've sacrificed, to lift people up instead of tearing them down." The young waitress had moved closer, holding her serving tray against her chest like a shield. The SEAL's mother watched the scene with quiet pride, seeing her son handle the situation with the same strength of character she'd worked so hard to instill in him. The largest biker suddenly pushed himself to his feet. The SEAL didn't move, didn't flinch, but something in his eyes made it clear he was prepared for anything. Instead of aggression, though, the biker turned to face the waitress. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I apologize for my behavior. It was completely out of line. You deserve better than that." He reached into his wallet and pulled out several bills. "This is for your school. It's not much, but maybe it'll help with some books or something." The waitress hesitated before accepting the money, a small smile of forgiveness crossing her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's very kind." The other two bikers stood as well, following their leader's example. They turned to the elderly woman, genuine remorse evident in their postures. "Ma'am," the middle one spoke up, "we're truly sorry for disrespecting you and your family. That gold star, we had no idea. Your sons, both of them, they're heroes. We acted like fools." The smallest one added, "My own grandfather was a Marine. He'd be ashamed of how I behaved today. I'm sorry." The elderly woman studied them for a moment before nodding. "Apology accepted. Sometimes the best lessons come from our mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them." The SEAL stood, his impressive height becoming fully apparent. But instead of intimidation, his stance now conveyed openness. "You ride in a group?" he asked the bikers. The largest one nodded. "Yeah, we got separated from the others about 20 miles back. They're probably at the rally site by now." "Motorcycle rally up in Cedar Grove?" When they nodded, the SEAL continued, "I know the place. Good spot. Used to ride myself before I enlisted." He paused, considering something. "Tell you what, why don't you join my mother and me for lunch? She makes me tell her all my non-classified stories when I'm home on leave. Might give you a different perspective on what service really means." The bikers exchanged surprised looks. The largest one spoke for the group, "You do that? After how we acted?" The SEAL's mother chimed in, "My son learned forgiveness alongside discipline. It's what makes him good at what he does, knowing when to be tough and when to be kind. Besides," the SEAL added with a slight smile, "I've got some stories about motorcycle convoys in some interesting places that might appeal to fellow riders. Though I doubt your bikes have ever had to dodge quite what ours did." The tension in the diner had completely dissipated, replaced by a sense of unexpected camaraderie. Other patrons returned to their meals, though many continued to cast admiring glances at the unusual group. The waitress brought extra chairs and menus, her movements now relaxed and confident. As they settled in to share a meal, the elderly woman watched her son with quiet joy. He'd grown into exactly the kind of man she'd hoped to raise, strong enough to command respect, wise enough to show mercy, and skilled enough to turn enemies into friends. The bikers, for their part, found themselves drawn into tales of brotherhood, courage, and service that went far beyond their own understanding of these concepts. Their attitudes had shifted from arrogant to attentive, their earlier behavior forgotten in the face of genuine connection and shared respect. As their food arrived, the atmosphere in the diner had transformed completely. The SEAL began sharing stories, carefully choosing ones that were both engaging and appropriate for civilian ears. His mother watched proudly as he balanced discretion with openness, noting how he'd mastered the art of storytelling without compromising operational security. "So there we were," he said, pausing to take a bite of his burger, "riding these beat-up motorcycles through the mountain passes. Local bikes, nothing fancy like yours. The kind that make more noise than power." He grinned at the bikers, who were hanging on every word. "The mission required us to blend in, which meant no fancy gear, no high-tech equipment, just us, these rattling bikes, and about 100 miles of the roughest terrain you can imagine." The largest biker, who had introduced himself as the road captain of their group, leaned forward. "Must have been rough without proper gear. We don't go anywhere without full safety equipment." "That's smart riding," the SEAL nodded approvingly. "But sometimes you have to work with what you've got." We'd studied the local riding styles for weeks. Had to learn to ride like locals, a bit reckless, a bit loose. Completely different from how we'd normally handle bikes. His mother interjected with a knowing smile, "You always did love motorcycles. Even as a boy, you'd spend hours in the garage with your father, working on that old Honda." The SEAL's eyes softened at the memory. "Dad taught me everything about engines. Said understanding how things work was just as important as knowing how to use them. Those lessons saved our lives more than once out there." The youngest biker, who had been quietly attentive, spoke up. "How so?" "Well, about halfway through that mountain pass, my bike started making this terrible clicking sound. Now, most people would have panicked, middle of nowhere, potential hostiles in the area, mission clock ticking. But thanks to Dad's lessons, I knew exactly what it was." He paused, looking at the bikers. "Any of you want to guess?" The middle biker stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Timing chain. Close. Clutch cable starting to fray. Had about 15 minutes tops before it would snap completely. We couldn't abort the mission, so we had to get creative." The SEAL took a sip of his coffee, building the suspense naturally. "Used some paracord and a bit of local ingenuity to rig a temporary fix. Not pretty, but it got us through." The waitress, who had been listening while serving nearby tables, returned to refill their coffee cups. "Sounds terrifying," she commented, genuinely invested in the story. "The scary part wasn't the bike breaking down," the SEAL continued. It was knowing that we had to maintain our cover no matter what. One wrong move, one out-of-place gesture, and our whole team could have been compromised. That's where the real training kicks in, not just the physical skills, but the mental discipline. His mother reached over and squeezed his hand. That's something most people don't understand about military service. It's not just about being strong or brave. It's about thinking clearly under pressure, making smart decisions when everything's going wrong. The road captain nodded slowly, a new respect evident in his expression. Like today. You could have handled this situation very differently. Violence is easy, the SEAL replied, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Control is hard. My instructors drilled that into us from day one. The strongest warrior isn't the one who can win every fight, it's the one who knows how to prevent the fight in the first place. The young waitress, now on her break, pulled up a chair to join them. Is that why you invited them to lunch instead of throwing them out? She asked, gesturing toward the bikers. The SEAL smiled. Partly. But also because I recognized something in them, something I see in a lot of the men I serve with. A desire to be part of something bigger than themselves, to live by a code. He looked at each biker in turn. You guys ride together, look out for each other, have your own rules and traditions. Not so different from what we do, just in a different context. The bikers exchanged thoughtful looks, clearly seeing their lifestyle in a new light. The road captain cleared his throat. You know, we do a lot of veteran charity rides. Never really understood what these men and women went through though. Not like this. Understanding comes from sharing stories, the SEAL's mother added. That's why I love hearing my son's adventures, even the scary ones. It helps me make sense of why he does what he does, why his brother made the ultimate sacrifice. A respectful silence fell over the table as everyone absorbed her words. The youngest biker fiddled with his bandana before asking, would you tell us about your other son? If it's not too painful? The elderly woman's eyes misted over, but her smile remained strong. Pain and pride often go hand in hand when you're a military mother. My younger son was just like his brother, brave, dedicated, always putting others first. He was a combat medic, saved countless lives before. She paused, touching her gold star pin again. The SEAL picked up where his mother left off, his voice gentle but firm. He died protecting his unit during an ambush. Ran through heavy fire to reach a wounded soldier. Got him to safety, but took a hit himself. He knew the risks, made the choice anyway. That's what service means, putting the mission and your teammates above yourself. The diner had grown quiet as the SEAL spoke about his brother, other patrons unconsciously leaning in to listen. The road captain removed his leather vest, revealing a faded POW, MIA t-shirt underneath. My old man was in Vietnam, he said softly. Never talked much about it. Now I'm wondering how many stories he took with him when he passed. The SEAL nodded understandingly. A lot of veterans keep their experiences close to the chest. Sometimes it's about security, sometimes it's about protecting loved ones from harsh realities. But mostly, it's because we think civilians won't understand. But you're sharing with us, the youngest biker pointed out. Why? Because sometimes the right moment comes along, the SEAL replied, glancing at his mother. And sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is to help others understand what they stood for. The waitress, still on her break, wiped away a tear. That's why I want to work at the VA hospital. These veterans have given so much. They deserve someone who'll listen, who'll try to understand. The SEAL's mother reached across the table and patted the young woman's hand. That's exactly the kind of person they need, dear. Someone who sees them as people, not just patients. The middle biker, who had been quietly contemplating his coffee, suddenly spoke up. You mentioned motorcycle convoys earlier. In your training, I mean. Was that part of your brother's experience too? The seal smiled, grateful for the chance to share another memory. Actually, it was. We did some joint training exercises before his last deployment. He always said the medics had the toughest job during convoy operations, having to monitor everyone's condition while maintaining formation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There was this one training exercise where we had to evacuate casualties through rough terrain. The vehicles couldn't get through, so we used dirt bikes. My brother rigged up this incredible stretcher system between two bikes. Saved the training scenario, but more importantly, he later used that same setup in real combat situations. Saved 3 lives with that innovation. The road captain whistled low. That's some serious riding skill. And courage. Innovation and adaptation, the SEAL agreed. That's what makes American service members special. We're trained to think on our feet, to use whatever resources we have. Sometimes that means motorcycles, sometimes it means making friends out of potential enemies. He gave the bikers a meaningful look. The youngest biker blushed slightly. Yeah, about that. I've been thinking. Our group does this annual ride for wounded veterans. Maybe you could help us understand better what they really need? Help us make it more meaningful? The SEAL exchanged glances with his mother before responding. I think that's a fantastic idea. In fact. He pulled out his phone and opened his contacts. I know some guys who run a legitimate veteran support organization. They could help coordinate, make sure the donations go where they're needed most. The road captain's eyes lit up. We usually raise about 10 grand each ride, but honestly, we've never been sure if it was doing the most good. Having real guidance would make a huge difference. That's how change happens, the SEAL's mother interjected, her voice warm with approval. One conversation, one connection at a time. You boys came in here thinking you were just passing through, but maybe there was a bigger purpose to this meeting. The middle biker nodded thoughtfully. You know what's funny? We were heading to this rally thinking it was all about showing off our bikes, having a good time. Now I'm sitting here thinking about how we can use our rides to actually make a difference. The waitress, checking her watch reluctantly, stood to return to work. My shift's almost over, but would it be okay if I got involved too? Maybe the diner could help sponsor the ride, provide a rest stop or something. Now that's thinking tactically, the SEAL grinned. Good support stations are crucial for any successful mission. As the waitress walked away, the road captain turned serious. You know, we owe you an apology for more than just our behavior earlier. We've been running these charity rides, claiming to support veterans, but we never really took the time to understand what that means. Been treating it more like a party than a mission. The important thing is that you're willing to learn and adapt, the SEAL responded. In our line of work, we call that tactical flexibility. And speaking of tactics, he grabbed a napkin and began sketching a rough map. If you're interested, I've got some ideas about how to make your next charity ride more impactful. The bikers leaned in eagerly as the SEAL began outlining his thoughts, their earlier confrontation completely transformed into purposeful collaboration. His mother watched proudly, recognizing how her son was doing what he did best, turning a potential conflict into an opportunity for positive change. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as the SEAL continued sketching on napkins, outlining his vision for the charity ride. His mother had pulled out her small reading glasses to better see the drawings, occasionally offering suggestions based on her years of experience with military family support groups. The key, the SEAL explained, drawing a series of interconnected circles, is to create meaningful touchpoints throughout the ride. It's not just about the destination, it's about the journey and what riders learn along the way. The road captain leaned forward, studying the makeshift map. We usually just do a straight shot to the rally point. You're suggesting something different? Exactly. See these stops? The seal pointed to the circles he'd drawn. Each one could represent a different aspect of military service and sacrifice. You could have veterans at each stop sharing their stories, displaying equipment, explaining different roles in the military. The youngest biker's eyes lit up. Like that story you told about the motorcycle convoy training? Something hands-on that helps people understand? Now you're thinking like a tactical planner, the SEAL smiled. But it goes deeper than just showing equipment or telling war stories. Each stop could also highlight different needs veterans face when they come home. His mother touched her gold star pin thoughtfully. The families too. So many people forget about the families. The middle biker, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. My sister's a nurse at the local hospital. She always says healthcare for veterans is more complicated than most people realize. That's another excellent touchpoint, the SEAL nodded. Maybe we could set up a stop where healthcare providers explain the unique challenges veterans face. The waitress who wants to work at the VA could get involved there. The road captain pulled out his own notebook, starting to take serious notes. We've got about 300 riders who usually participate. If we spread them out across different routes, each hitting these educational stops, you'd be creating a rolling awareness campaign, the SEAL finished. And here's something else to consider, involve the local businesses, like this diner. Create a community-wide effort to support veterans. His mother smiled warmly. It's what my boys always believed in, bringing people together, building understanding. That's what really helps veterans feel welcomed back home. The youngest biker looked around the diner, which had become their impromptu planning center. You know what's crazy? If we hadn't been such jerks earlier, none of this would be happening. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best opportunities. That's something we learn pretty quick in the teams, the SEAL replied. Every obstacle can become an opportunity if you approach it with the right mindset. Just then, the waitress returned with fresh coffee refills. I just got off the phone with my manager, she announced excitedly. He loves the idea of being a stop on the charity ride. Says we could set up a special menu, with proceeds going to veteran support programs. The SEAL's mother beamed. See? The ripples are already spreading. This is how real change happens, person by person, business by business, community by community. The road captain looked at his fellow bikers, then back at the SEAL. We've been doing this ride for 5 years, thinking we were making a difference. But now I see we were just scratching the surface. With this new approach, we could really educate people, create lasting impact. That's the difference between a mission and an operation, the SEAL explained. A mission has a deeper purpose, a lasting effect. An operation is just about completing objectives. He pulled another napkin over and started sketching again. Let's talk about timing and coordination. In the teams, we use something called a time phase plan. It helps ensure everyone knows their role and when to execute. The bikers gathered closer, their earlier arrogance completely replaced by genuine interest and respect. The middle biker pulled up a map on his phone, starting to mark potential routes and stops. We'll need to coordinate with local law enforcement, the road captain mused. Get proper permits, ensure safety along the routes. And we'll need to prep the veterans who will be sharing their stories, the SEAL's mother added. Help them understand how to communicate their experiences in a way that connects with civilians. The youngest biker suddenly sat up straighter. What if we created some kind of guidebook? Something riders could keep after the event, with information about veteran services, ways to stay involved? Now you're thinking strategically, the SEAL approved. Documentation and follow-through are crucial for any successful mission. It's not just about the one-day event, it's about creating lasting change. His mother reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook of her own. I have contacts in several military family support groups. They could help provide materials, maybe even staff some of the stops. The atmosphere in the diner had transformed completely from the tense confrontation of a few hours ago. Now it buzzed with purposeful energy as the unlikely group continued planning, each person contributing their unique perspective and skills to the emerging project. As the afternoon wore on, the diner had become a hub of activity. Other patrons, overhearing the planning discussion, had begun stopping by their table to offer suggestions and support. The waitress had brought over extra napkins for sketching, and the diner's owner had emerged from the kitchen to join the conversation. "You know," the diner owner said, pulling up a chair, "my father served in Korea. He always said the hardest part wasn't the war itself, it was coming home and feeling like nobody understood what he'd been through." The SEAL nodded solemnly. That's still one of the biggest challenges veterans face today. The transition back to civilian life can be harder than any mission we've run. His mother squeezed his hand, remembering his own adjustment period after his first deployment. That's why this ride idea is so important. It's not just about raising money, it's about building bridges of understanding. The road captain had been making calls to other members of their motorcycle group, and his phone kept buzzing with enthusiastic responses. "Our guys are all in," he reported. "Some of them have family members who served. They're asking if they can bring their stories, their photos, make it personal." "That's perfect," the SEAL approved. Personal connections are what make the message stick. When people can put a face, a story, to the concept of military service, it changes everything. The youngest biker was working with the waitress, mapping out potential food stations along the route. "We're thinking each stop could feature different military rations through history," he explained. "Give people a taste, literally, of what service members deal with. Just make sure you warn them about the cheese spread in the MREs," the SEAL chuckled. "That stuff's an acquired taste." The middle biker, who had been quiet for a while, cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about something. You know those team-building exercises companies do? What if we incorporated some modified military training exercises at each stop? Nothing too intense, but enough to give people a small taste of the teamwork required in service?" The SEAL's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. We could set up simple problem-solving scenarios, communication challenges. Show people how military training is about more than just physical strength." His mother added, "And we could have family members share their experiences too. Help people understand that service affects the whole family unit." The diner owner snapped his fingers. "I've got a big parking lot. We could set up one of the stations here, maybe focus on the importance of community support for veterans and their families." The planning continued to evolve, with each person contributing ideas that built upon the others. The road captain's phone kept buzzing with messages from other riders, each wanting to help in their own way. "One of our members works in local media," he shared. "She's offering to help document the whole thing, create a video that could inspire other communities to do something similar." The SEAL pulled out his own phone. "I've got some buddies from the teams who'd probably be willing to help too. They're always looking for positive ways to connect with civilians, break down those barriers." The youngest biker had been scribbling furiously in his notebook. "You know what we could call it? Riders Understanding Military Service, RUMS for short." Everyone around the table groaned good-naturedly at the acronym, but the SEAL's mother smiled. "Sometimes the simplest names are the best. It's clear, straightforward, says exactly what we're trying to do." "Speaking of understanding," the middle biker said, looking somewhat embarrassed, "I keep thinking about how this all started. We were being such idiots, but you turned it into something positive. That's real leadership." The SEAL shook his head. "Leadership isn't about one person having all the answers. It's about bringing people together, recognizing potential, and channeling energy in the right direction. Look at what's happening here, everyone's contributing, everyone's ideas are making this better." His mother watched proudly as the conversation continued to flow, remembering all the times she'd worried about her son's choice to serve. Now she could see how their influence extended far beyond their actual military service, creating ripples of understanding and connection in unexpected ways. The waitress, returning from serving other customers, added her own observation. "You know what's amazing? A few hours ago, this was almost a fight. Now it's turned into this incredible project that could help so many people." "That's the thing about conflict," the SEAL replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes it's not about winning or losing, it's about finding the common ground you didn't know was there." In the teams, we learn that the best victories often don't involve any fighting at all. The late afternoon sun cast golden light through the diner's windows as the planning session reached a new level of intensity. The road captain's phone had become a command center of sorts, coordinating with other writers and local businesses who wanted to participate. The napkin sketches had evolved into more detailed plans drawn on proper paper provided by the diner owner. "Let me make sure I've got this straight," the road captain said, reviewing his notes. "We're looking at 5 major stops along the route, each focusing on a different aspect of military service and veteran support. The diner here will be our central coordination point." The SEAL nodded, pointing to various locations on their makeshift map. Each stop tells part of the larger story. The first stop focuses on basic training and teamwork, the second on specialized skills and adaptability, the third on family support and sacrifice, the fourth on veteran healthcare and recovery, and the final stop brings it all together with resources and ongoing support opportunities. His mother had been making calls of her own, reaching out to her network of military families. "I've already got 5 families willing to share their stories at the family support stop. They'll bring photos, letters, help people understand what it means to love someone who serves." The youngest biker looked up from his phone excitedly. "Just heard back from the city. They're fast-tracking our permit requests because of the charitable nature of the event. They're even offering police escort support for the main rider groups. That's crucial for safety," the SEAL approved. "In any operation, security and coordination are paramount. Speaking of which..." He turned to the middle biker, who had been working on a communication plan. "How's the radio coordination coming along?" The middle biker spread out a frequency chart he'd been developing. "We'll have designated channels for each segment of the ride, plus emergency channels for medical and support services. Local ham radio operators have volunteered to help maintain communication links between all stops." The waitress, who had been juggling her regular duties with helping plan the diner's role, joined them during another break. "My nursing school classmates are excited to help at the healthcare stop. They want to set up basic health screening stations, provide information about veteran-specific health issues." "That's perfect," the SEAL's mother said warmly. "Sometimes the first step in getting help is just knowing what help is available." The diner owner, who had been making his own calls, shared some news. "Just got off the phone with the local veterans organization. They're offering to bring some of their vintage military vehicles for display. Thought it might add something special to each stop." The SEAL considered this. "That could work well. We could use the vehicles to help tell the story of military evolution, show how service has changed over the years while the core values remain the same." The road captain's phone buzzed again. "More good news. One of our sister chapters 2 states over wants to know if they can implement the same program in their area. This thing could spread across the country." "That's how lasting change happens," the SEAL said thoughtfully. "It starts small, proves its worth, then grows organically. In the teams, we call it strategic expansion, taking a successful tactical approach and scaling it up effectively." His mother touched her gold star pin, eyes glistening. "Your brother would have loved this. He always said the best way to honor service is to build understanding." The youngest biker, who had been somewhat quiet, suddenly spoke up. "You know what's really hitting me? This morning, we were just 3 guys being jerks, thinking we were tough. Now we're part of something that could actually make a real difference." The middle biker nodded in agreement. It's like you said earlier about military training, it's not just about physical strength or showing off. It's about purpose, about using whatever skills you have to serve something bigger than yourself. The waitress, who had been collecting more coffee orders from around the table, added her perspective. And it's showing how different parts of the community can work together. Bikers, veterans, businesses, healthcare workers, families, everyone bringing their own piece to the puzzle. That's actually a very military way of thinking, the SEAL explained. In special operations, we rely on what we call force multiplication, using everyone's unique capabilities to create an impact greater than the sum of its parts. The road captain looked around the table, taking in how much had changed in just a few hours. When we rolled into this diner, we thought we were just stopping for lunch. Instead, we found a mission. Sometimes the best missions find you, the SEAL smiled. The trick is being ready to recognize the opportunity when it presents itself, then having the courage to commit to it fully. His mother reached over and patted the road captain's hand. And sometimes it takes a moment of conflict to open our eyes to the possibilities we couldn't see before. The afternoon was beginning to fade into evening, but the energy around the table showed no signs of diminishing. What had started as a confrontation had transformed into a planning session, and was now evolving into something even bigger, a movement that could potentially change how communities across the country connected with their veterans. As evening settled over the small-town diner, the group realized they'd spent nearly 6 hours transforming an almost conflict into something extraordinary. The dinner crowd had started to filter in, many of them catching snippets of the ongoing planning session and stopping to offer their own ideas and support. The SEAL checked his watch, knowing he'd need to head out soon to catch his transport back to base. His leave time was precious, but he couldn't think of a better way to have spent this day with his mother. Looking around the table at the now familiar faces, he saw something that reminded him of his team, different people united by a common purpose. Before we wrap this up, the road captain said, there's something we need to address. He reached into his leather vest and pulled out a patch, the emblem of their motorcycle group. We have a tradition. When someone changes our perspective, shows us a better way, we make them an honorary member. The SEAL's mother watched with tears in her eyes as the road captain stood and formally presented the patch to her son. This doesn't just represent membership, the biker explained. It represents a promise. A promise that will see this through, that will make this program everything it can be. The SEAL accepted the patch with appropriate gravity, understanding the weight of symbols and traditions. I'll carry this with honor, he said quietly. And I'll hold you to that promise. The youngest biker, who had been working on his phone, looked up with excitement. Just got confirmation from the National Motorcycle Association. They want to feature our program in their next newsletter. They're calling it a groundbreaking initiative in veteran support and community engagement. The middle biker added, and the local VFW chapter just texted. They're offering their facility as one of the education stops. Said they've been looking for ways to connect with younger veterans and the community. The waitress, finishing her shift, joined them one last time. My nursing school dean called back. They want to make veteran healthcare awareness a regular part of our curriculum. Said this program helped them see the need. The diner owner, who had been quietly supportive throughout the day, stepped forward. I've been thinking about my father, about how he struggled after Korea. A program like this, it could have made all the difference. So I want to do something. He pulled out a business card and handed it to the road captain. I'm offering my diner as a permanent meeting point for veteran support groups. A place where they can gather, share stories, find the understanding they need. The SEAL's mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. This is how healing happens, she said softly. Not all at once, but person by person, story by story, connection by connection. The SEAL stood, knowing it was time to leave. What happened here today, he said, looking around at each face, this is what we fight for. Not just the big ideas of freedom and democracy, but the small moments where people come together, where understanding grows, where communities strengthen. The road captain and his fellow bikers stood as well, their posture unconsciously straightening to match the SEAL's military bearing. "We came in here thinking we were tough guys," the road captain admitted. "Learned what real toughness is. It's having the courage to change, to admit when you're wrong, to work for something bigger than yourself." The youngest biker, who had shown perhaps the most transformation throughout the day, spoke up. "You know what gets me? This morning, we were making fun of a Gold Star mother, disrespecting everything she and her sons sacrificed for. Now we're part of carrying that legacy forward, helping other people understand what that sacrifice really means." The SEAL's mother stood and, to everyone's surprise, hugged each of the bikers in turn. "Sometimes the worst moments bring out the best in people," she said. "My sons taught me that. And today, you all proved it." The middle biker, usually the quietest of the group, found his voice. "Ma'am, we'll never be able to fully make up for how we acted earlier. But I promise you, every time we run this program, every veteran we help, every story we share, it'll be in honor of both your sons." As the group finally prepared to part ways, the diner had become something more than just a restaurant. It had become a birthplace of something new, something important. The SEAL shook hands with each of the bikers, no longer seeing them as antagonists but as partners in a vital mission. "Remember," he said as a final word, "the success of any mission depends on follow-through. I'll be checking in, expecting updates on your progress." The road captain grinned. "Wouldn't have it any other way, sir. We've got our orders." As the SEAL and his mother walked out to their car, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. The 3 motorcycles still sat in the parking lot, but they seemed different now, no longer symbols of intimidation, but tools for positive change. "You know," his mother said as they reached their car, "your brother always said that sometimes the best victories are the ones where nobody has to lose." She touched her gold star pin, smiling through her tears. Today proved him right. The SEAL looked back at the diner, where the bikers were already deep in discussion about next steps. The waitress was sharing their story with new customers, and the owner was hanging a new sign in the window, "Veterans and families always welcome." "Mom," he said softly, "some people might call today a coincidence, us being here, them coming in, everything that followed. But in the teams, we have a saying, coincidence is just opportunity in disguise." As they drove away, the SEAL couldn't help but smile, knowing that what had started as a potential confrontation in a small-town diner had grown into something that would touch countless lives. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important victories aren't won on the battlefield, they're won in quiet moments of understanding, in the courage to change, and in the willingness to turn conflict into connection.